Yogena chittasya padena vacham malam sharirasya cha vaidyakena yopakurotam pravaram muninam patanjalim pranjaliranatosmi stuve patanjalim vyasam shankaram cha munitrayam kartrusutrasya bhashyasya krama vivaranasya cha. We are coming almost to the close of this text, and maybe with the next session we will conclude this particular text, and then I'm planning to start a series of classes on different systems of Indian philosophy as a continuation of this series. So this is we are not planning to conclude today, but we'll conclude with the next session. So I think we were discussing this 31st sutra, Tataha Kadarthanam Parinama Kramasamapti Gunanam. It's in a way takes us closer to the ultimate goal of yoga practice. The idea is the entire creation, the evolution from Prakriti to Mahatattva, Ahankara, then the senses, mind, intellect, and of course the sense objects, the phenomenal world. This descending order of evolution is essentially meant for going through different experiences and eventually to realize that we are not one with this fleeting, momentary phenomena. Our true nature is the eternal reality, Purusha. Well, I can explain this by referring to Swami Vivekananda's description of the last sutra of this text. Purushartha shunyanam gunanam pradiprasava kaivalyam surupa pradishtava chidisaktehi idi. So Patanjali says the resolution in the inverse order of qualities and bereft of any motive action for the Purusha is kaivalya. So what is the ultimate goal of yoga practice? To attain spiritual liberation, to identify with our true spiritual identity, to realize that we are not just these physical bodies or sense objects or these changing emotions and feelings which identify themselves with our mind. We are something far greater, much deeper, and a much more transcendental reality. That is, we are Purusha, we are the Atman. This is actually the purpose of Pradiprasava. Pradiprasava means reverse evolution. By evolution from the ultimate Purusha, Prakriti, we have come down to the level of sense objects. In other words, if somebody tells you, we are nothing other than these physical bodies, and the physical body comes into existence and exists for some time, maybe for 100 years, and disappears like a rock coming into existence, existing for a long time, and maybe getting dissolved into something else. So if you identify yourself with the physical body, you are actually disinheriting, you are denying your own spiritual legacy. We are reducing ourselves to the status of a rock, a piece of mud, or anything that grows in nature. But Patanjali tells us that we are not these sense objects. Of course, through this evolutionary process, evolution is the word used here. It may not mean the same in the sense in which Darwin used this word evolution. It's not the biological evolution that we are talking about. According to yoga or Sankhya concept of evolution. What evolution means? We disinherit ourselves. We disown our own true spiritual identity, and then we go on identifying ourselves with the mind, intellect, and eventually the physical bodies and the sense objects. From this evolution, we have to go back to our real source. And that going back to our real source, our true nature, is called by the Sanskrit word pradiprasava. It means, in other words, evolution in inverse order, because it's a reverse evolution. Vivekananda used the word the resolution in the inverse order. So that's what is honest. In other words, this nature has slowly taken you from your identification with the external world, slowly helped you to go back to your own source. So evolution in the reverse order, going back to our true nature, from effect to cause. This is the purpose of human life. That's what we actually do in spiritual life. The first thing that happens to us when we take to spiritual life is we suddenly feel that we are not just these physical bodies. If we are just the physical bodies, then we are it's just like a billionaire dressing up like a beggar and actually start believing that he's a beggar. He may have billions of dollars in the bank, but he suddenly thinks that he's just a beggar and he sits on the street corner begging for money. So Vivekananda calls it a hypnotism, and he says the whole purpose of spiritual life is to dehypnotize. This dehypnotization means you are waking up somebody who is sleeping and is dreaming, and is dreaming something terrible. You suddenly wake him up and then you tell him, well, you are not the terrible things that you dreamt of in your dreams. This is your real name. So this kind of waking up a person during his spiritual slumber, this is the purpose of yoga. So it is called by the technical name pradiprasava. Prasava actually means coming into existence. That's what prasava means, birth. Pradiprasava means from this empirical existence, you are going back to your true nature. And your true nature is, you are not something that comes into existence, exists for some time, and then gets dissolved. You are the divine spark. So once you identify ourselves with that divine nature of ours, then we have no problem that the ultimate solution to all the problems, that is the way of Patanjali. Anyway, we will come to that later, because the last sutra is being very, very touchingly, in a moving language, Swami Vivekananda interprets the last sutra. He says, nature is a loving mother or grandmother who takes you by your hand and tells you, look here, you are not just like the empirical phenomenal things that you see outside. If we start thinking of ourselves as no different from a piece of rock or a tree or a mountain, then actually it's a terrible tragedy. Why should we study philosophy? Why should we sing? Why should we study literature? Why should we take to music if we are just physical bodies? So it's a terrible tragedy. So yoga, so Swami Vivekananda says, commenting on the last sutra of the last sutra, means 33rd sutra, Swamiji says, nature's task is done. What's the nature's task? Look here, you suppose a small kid, your grandson or granddaughter, is crying, I want candies, I want these toys. So grandmother takes the kid, the small child, to big shop and gives him plenty of candies all the wonderful sweets that he wanted, and also buy him lot of toys. And finally the child eats a lot of candies, plays with the toys, then the child gets exhausted, and now she wants something else. You give him another candy, he'll throw it away. You give him a toy, he'll throw it at your face. Now you have to give him something more profound. So that's what Vivekananda says, nature's task is done. This unselfish task which our sweet nurse, nature, had imposed upon herself, she gently took the self-forgetting soul by the hand. The self-forgetting soul is the kid, and nature is the grandmother, as it were, and showed him all the experiences in this world. The cars, money, job, everything. Let's say, all the manifestations, bringing him higher and higher through various bodies, till his lost glory came back and he remembered his own nature. Then the kind mother went back the same way she came for others who also have lost their way in this trackless desert of life. And thus is she working, without beginning and without end. And thus, through pleasure and pain, through good and evil, the infinite river of souls is flowing into the ocean of perfection of self-realization. This self-realization, this getting back to our true nature. In other words, the heaven that we are looking for is within our own hearts. You don't think of heaven somewhere far above where everything is wonderful. In fact, of course, in some traditions, if you read the descriptions of heaven, you would rather choose hell, in fact. So I'm not going to that. But what Vedanta or yoga tells you is, you can discover the heaven within you. It's simple. Just practice a little self-restraint, little contentment, little purity of mind, a little unselfishness, a little self-control, sense-control, and you find, you suddenly discovered heaven is within you. So heaven we can create in our own home, and our home is our own heart. That's why, I mentioned earlier, the very foundation of all that we discuss in yoga is yamas and niyamas. Non-violence, non-stealing, or having freedom from desire for things that belong to others, truthfulness, non-possessiveness, purity of life, contentment, inner and outer purity, feeding our mind with good spiritual food, essence of resignation. If you believe in God, it's easy. Your resignation to God. Practice unselfishness, purity in our own inner life, and you suddenly find heaven is sitting right inside your heart. And so the grandmother's duty is to point out this to you, not to give you in a platter. Your liberation is not given you in a platter. The grandmother's duty, the nature, the Swami Vivekananda used the word nature, nature is used here actually. Nature here is not the empirical nature, rivers and mountains and valleys. It is the source of all existence. Prakriti. The Prakriti is the word that is used here, that is translated into the English word nature in Vivekananda's exposition of the last sutra. Now, that is the essence of the 31st sutra also. Tataha kridarthanam. What the kridartha means? Artha means goal, what you want to attain. Krida means already attained. So, after reaching your goal, Parinama krama samaptihi, then there is no more evolution. Then it's just like child has already eaten enough candies. He has already played with all the toys. Now the child wants something else. Rather, In modern time, the child wants to go back to his or her mother. Or the child wants to know his or her true nature. So that's why, so what it means is, when we attain the dharma meka samadhi, that is this viveka khyati, the discerning wisdom, then what happens? All this process of evolution, all the crying and weeping and struggling, working hard for money and wealth and status, we may work for it, but we won't struggle for it. And we won't be shocked or surprised or disappointed when we lose any of these empirical things, because we realize that they are empirical, they are non-eternal, they are perishable things, momentary. So what happens then? Kritarthanam, Parinama Krama Samapti Gunanam. Next sutra is also very important. 33rd. Kshana Pradiyogi Parinama Aparanta Nirgrahi Kramaha. So this is a very famous sutra, and because Patanjali is coming closer and closer to the ultimate goal of yoga practice, so this 33rd sutra I shall read. I shall explain Vyasa's commentary in Sanskrit, and then of course I shall explain in English, and if there is some problem, it's a bit complicated because actually Vyasa is summing up, he's giving a summary of the whole purpose of human life. As I mentioned earlier on many occasions, there is no mention of a God here. There is no mention of a religion here. What Patanjali tells us is, you realize your own true nature. You are not just one with these perishable, momentary, empirical, worldly things. You are something much more than what you imagine yourself to be. You are something much more than this physical body, this body-mind complex. Once you realize, then you won't be playing with toys. You won't be crying for candies. Candies means these empirical, worldly, sensory pleasures. We won't run away from this world, but we'll be able to manage this world, our own world and our own experiences, much more intelligently, a kind of spiritual intelligence. So I shall read this sutra. Kshana Pradiyogi Parinama Aparanta Nirgrahi Kramaha. What happens is, when this, Kshana Pradiyogi, what it essentially means is, the literal meaning, Kshana Pradiyogi is Pradiyogi is a term used in Indian logic. Actually, Pradiyogi means counterpart or counterpoint. Kshana Pradiyogi means that for which Kshana or moment is a counterpart. That means, to give an example, succession or change. Pradiyogi means the absence of something. For example, in the Indian logic, that's why this sutra is a bit complicated. In Indian logic, the word Pradiyogi is used. Ghata Pradiyogi. Ghata means a pot. Ghata means a pot. Ghata Pradiyogi means the counterpart of a pot. It means a pot is, or a pot indicates the absence of a pot. Or let us say a pot negates the absence of a pot. So that is the technical. This is an important language used in Indian logic. In the number of dialectical works in Indian logic, we call it in Nyaya philosophy, is very, very elaborate. That word, the word is used here, means then there is no more changes happening. You already understand the ultimate result of a change. So, for example, I can give an example. Parinama Abaranta Nigraha Kramaha. Suppose you have a piece of cloth, an old cloth. You see, if you see an old cloth, what you see when you see an old cloth, you immediately understand that that cloth has already undergone a lot of changes, and the oldness of the old cloth is the result of a lot of changes that have already happened. At the end of a series of changes which lead to the cloth getting old, there is an old cloth in front of you. Like that, when you reach a point where you go beyond the momentary changes, the changes and the evolutionary process happening in every moment, every kshana, then what happens is you already realize that you have transcended the changes. You have transcended this slow sequence of evolutionary mutation. So when you reach that state, there is no more evolution taking place. That is the end of it. So I shall read the commentary, then it becomes clear. Kshanana antaryama si parinamasya abarantena avasane grihyate kramaha. Okay, so kshananantarya means after the passage of changes happening every moment, what you see is parinamasya abarantena avasane grihyate kramaha. After a series of changes happening from moment to moment, finally you reach a state where you see yourself to have transcended all these changes, and that is the beginning when you start your journey backward. Journey backward means journey back in search of our own true nature. So what is the Parinama? Parinama is nothing but this descending order of changes happening from Prakriti, Mahatattva, Ahankara, then mind, Jnanendriyas, Karmendriyas, Tanmatras, and Panchamahabhutas. In other words, in a descending order, we have forgotten our Purusha nature, then we identified with ourselves with this Prakriti, and then as a result of these changes happening in name and form, the changes happening at the level of gunas, we started the descending journey. Finally, we have come to a miserable end, forgetting our true nature. Right now we have reached a point where we identify ourselves as a body-mind complex that comes into existence at some point of time in the past, living for some time and then disappearing, that we have reached the lowest level of the descending order of evolution, that is Panchamahabhutas, that is a Sanskrit word used, or the 5 sense objects. In other words, I mentioned this earlier, a billionaire suddenly starts thinking that he is a pauper, he has no money, and he starts thinking himself to be in a miserable condition. So yoga is like a grandmother who actually tells you, no, you are not a penniless, you are not a bankrupt person. You have a lot of money in the bank. You realize this. You go to your home, take your checkbook, you go to the bank. So you are not a bankrupt person. So this is what yoga actually does. So, but then for that we have to reverse our evolution. Through this descending order of evolution, we have reached this lowest level of misery, identifying ourselves with this body-mind complex. Now we have to reverse this process, and that reverse process is called either inverse or reverse evolution, or you can say counter evolution in Sanskrit. In the Patanjali Yoga Sutras language called prati prasava, means the opposite of being birth, going back to our true nature. Nahi ananubhuta kramakshana navasya puranada vastrasya ante bhavati. So what this means is, without the experience of the passage of time, we won't be able to understand. Without understanding that an old cloth has gone through a lot of changes, their gunas and characteristics and qualities, without being aware of the changes that have taken place in a new cloth, you will not be able to understand or define the oldness of an old cloth. So, when we identify ourselves with the physical body, we should know that we have reached this point through a process of descending order of evolution. So, when you see an old cloth, say a cloth is old. So, when you see an old cloth, you realize that it is old, but along with realizing the oldness of this old cloth, you also realize that it has gone through several levels, several stages of evolution through kshanas. At the end of this evolution, you have reached this stage. Now the purpose is to go back to our original source. That's why nahi ananubhuta kramakshana navasya puranada vastrasya ante bhavati. Vastra means cloth. Puranada means antiquity or old age. So you will not be able to recognize or realize the oldness of an old cloth without at the same time realizing that that cloth had gone through a series of evolution changes due to wear and tear. So many people must have worn that cloth for a long time. It must have already been kept and cared for. So the older cloth has become too old or brittle. Nityeshu cha kramo drishtaha. Dvai cha iyam nityada kudastha nityada parinami nityada. These are the very important ideas in Nyaya philosophy, also in the yoga philosophy. Nityeshu cha kramo drishtaha. Nitya means eternal. What are the two eternal realities in yoga philosophy, which is again linked to Sankhya philosophy? The two eternal realities in yoga philosophy are Purusha and Prakriti. Purusha is self-effulgent, it is the transcendental reality. Prakriti is the empirical reality. Both are eternal realities. That's why yoga system is a pluralism, it's kind of dualistic philosophy. Due to ignorance, due to some kind of delusion of a true nature, because we are not aware of the fact that we are actually self-effulgent, Purusha is our true nature, what happens? We feel we are bound. And this is because we identify ourselves with all that we see every day. This very, very often we can understand. What do we identify ourselves with in our everyday life? We identify ourselves with what we think, state of our mind, where happiness and unhappiness, which may be the result of our interaction with external things. So, even the most intellectually advanced person normally identifies himself with mind or intellect. Either he is happy or unhappy, either he is educated or non-educated. That's that we normally identify ourselves with. And this is because of ignorance. Once we realize that Purusha is a true nature, then we will not define ourselves, we will not describe ourselves in terms of our empirical qualities. So, empirical qualities are the results of the evolutes of ahankara. Mind and senses are both the evolutes of ahankara, the ego system, which again third in the series of evolution. I mean, first Prakriti, then Mahatattva, then Ahankara. And then Tanmatra, then Panchamahabhuta. This is how the evolutionary ladder descends. So, what really happens is, once we realize that we are not these evolutes, then we can retrace our steps and go back in search of our true identity. So, Nityeshu Chakramo Drishtaha. Nitya means Nityeshu. Bahuvajana means a plural is used. It means in these eternal realities of Prakriti and Purusha, also there is a krama. Dvaicha iyam nityada, kudastha nityada, parinama nityada. So these are technical terms used. Kuda means anvil. Anvil is very strong. It is very stable. So a goldsmith in ancient times used to use an anvil on which he will hit the gold after melting it. So also locksmiths and maybe those who work in the field of steel, iron, gold, they used to use a anvil. The anvil is kuda. A goldsmith may place a hot piece of gold, which is hot enough, on the anvil, then he may hit it with a hammer. Changes happen to the gold, but changes will not happen to the anvil. The anvil remains absolutely unchanging. It will not even shake. It is very solid. It is strongly anchored on the ground. But of course, the piece of gold may undergo changes. So, the anvil is kudastha nityada. Kuda means kudasthita, means kuda is in the anvil. That is Purusha. So, Purusha is, in other words, Purusha is eternally real. It has absolutely no change. It remains the same. But at the same time, the gold may change into different forms and also different names. So, on the one hand, there is one kind of a change taking place, is transformative change. Gold can change. Gold will not cease to be gold, but the gold can become a ring, it can become a necklace, it can become something else, depending upon the way the goldsmith is working on the gold. But goldness will not change. So there is an element of eternality, or there is an element of eternal, that is eternal in the gold, but at the same time the gunas, the characteristics will change. A gold can become a ring, a gold can become some other ornament or something. And it is called Parinama Nityada, means changing reality. Parinami Nityada, changing eternality, you can say. Changing, I mean reality, but it is changing. Changing only in a secondary sense, because the golden ring continues to be gold, but it is no more necklace. It is not a necklace now, it has become a ring. A ring may also can become a necklace. So it is transformative nityada, transformative reality, eternal. So that is Prakriti. So Prakriti is transformative. It is eternal, but changes do happen in Prakriti. From Prakriti, because of various changes happening at the guna level, Prakriti becomes Mahatattva, Mahatattva becomes Ahankara. Ahankara again is the source of evolution of mind, emotions, feelings, thoughts, and so on. And then again, the subtle aspects of the empirical world called Tanmatras, and then the 5 elements constituting the empirical world. This is how the evolution happens in a descending order. That evolution indicates changes at the guna level and not the changes at the substance level. So that's why it's called Parinami Nityada. Prakriti is subjected to parinami nityada. It is eternal, but it is changing and also eternal. Changing with regard to their characteristics, that is gunas, and unchanging with regard to its essence, that is, it remains gold. Purusha, on the other hand, it is always the same. Like Koda. You should remember that these terms are used with a profound sense. Koda is the anvil on which a goldsmith may work. Anvil never undergoes any change. But the hot piece of gold can change its form, its name, according to the need, according to the requirements. In other words, transformations take place only at the level of gunas. So that's why dvayi cha iyam nityada, this eternal nature is twofold. One is kudastha nityada, eternal nature like that of an anvil. Parinami nityada, the eternal nature like the eternal nature of gold, which can of course become a golden ornament, golden necklace, golden ring, whatever it is. Tatra kudastha nityada purushasya. Purusha, that's our true nature. It is unchanging. It never undergoes any change. Gunas do not affect them. Parinami nityada gunanam. This transformative eternal nature, the transformative permanence, so to speak, is with regard to gunas. So remember that nityada is an important term used in Vedanta and also in yoga. The word nityam has got a special meaning in Vedanta. Here, it has got, of course, it is used in the same sense, but qualitatively different. Nityam in Vedanta means something that never undergoes any change in the past, present and future. It remains the same in our experience in waking state, in dream state and deep sleep state. It is beyond the six changes. Six changes are taking birth, existing, growing, evolving, decaying and disappearing. It's called Shadvikaras. Jayade, Asti, Vardhade, Viparinamade, Apakshyade, Vinasyade. Six changes according to Vedanta. At the same time, in Yoga Sankhya system, the word Nitya doesn't have that profound implication. But still, it implies something that is eternal. So, Parinami Nityada Gunanam. So, Prakriti changes, but only with regard to gunas. Prakriti is essentially, it remains the same. In other words, according to Yoga and Sankhya system, our mind, our intellect, our feelings and emotions, and this external world that we see and experience, and the senses like our eyes and ears with which we come in contact with the external world, all these are different evolutes of Prakriti. One difference, it's just like from Prakriti, the great cosmic intelligence comes, the ecosystem comes, the mind comes and so on. Just like from the same gold, you can manufacture a golden necklace, a golden ring or whatever you want. But essentially, it is the same Prakriti. This is a yoga view, Sankhya. Remember, these ideas are slightly different in Vedanta. That you can ask, if you are interested, you can ask questions during interaction. Yasmin parinamyamane tattvam na nikhanyade tan nityam. What it essentially means is something in which its essential nature is never destroyed. That is nityam. Its characteristics and qualities and properties may change, but essentially it remains the same. It is nityam. That thing, that aspect of anything which remains unchanging is nityam or eternal. Ubhayasya cha tattva anabhigada nityatvam. So this is an important point, remember. Ubhaya means of the two, Prakriti and Purusha. So yoga system is a dualistic system. Dualism implies a system of philosophy in which there is more than one eternal category. So that is the essence of dualism. Non-dualism means a system of philosophy in which only one transcendental absolute reality is there. Everything else is relative. Dualism, on the other hand, accepts two fundamental ontological categories. In Sankhya Yoga system, both Purusha and Prakriti are both accepted as eternal categories. So, Ubhayasya cha tattva anabhigada nityatvam. In both Purusha and Prakriti, there is something, tattvam, which remains unchanging. So, tattva anabhigada. Anabhigada means it doesn't get destroyed. Its essential nature remains the same, it is never destroyed. Tatra gunadharmeshu buddhyadishu parinama aparanta nigrahikramo labdhavadyavasanaha. So, Prakriti or cosmic intelligence, then our ego system, the mind, the senses, all of them emerge from Prakriti. And then as a result of this, we start identifying ourselves with everything that we experience. See, this is common, this is something very simple to understand. Normally, our mind assumes the form of whatever it sees or hears. See, for example, when you hear the sound of a car moving in the streets, at that moment, the visual image of a car will come to our mind. Our mind actually takes the form of a visual image of a car. So also the same thing happens when we actually see a car, which means mind and eyes come together, we see an object. Mind and ears coming together, we come to know something by hearing. So also, when we taste something, our mind identifies itself with the taste. So also, the sense of touch and sense of smell. This happens. So mind assumes that form. That's why we are able to know things and remember things. This is what is happening. Now, all these changes take place at the level of gunas. As a result of this, we identify ourselves with what we see, what we hear, what we imagine, and so on. All these are examples of different kinds of changes taking place with regard to name and form, which are again related to the evolution taking place at the level of gunas. Guna means properties or characteristics. But essentially, mind is still essentially Prakriti itself. This is an important point. In Vedanta, mind is a reflecting medium. But in yoga, mind is just a evolute, a dead substance, an evolute of Prakriti, which itself is Jada. Jada means it is non-effulgent. So the purpose of yoga or the purpose of any system of spiritual philosophy is to slowly help you to trace your journey back to your own spiritual home, to your own spiritual identity. Yoga system of philosophy is considered to be imperfect in its conclusion. That's because it begins with dualism, it ends with dualism. And finally it says, Prakriti has finished its whole purpose. Prakriti again going back, because there are so many billions of jivas, individual souls in the world. And Prakriti has to come back again and guide each soul back to its destiny. Vedanta, on the other hand, says this is perfectly true. But as we evolve further, we understand this Prakriti, all these things, they are real, they are not eternally real. So Prakriti is designated only the status of a secondary reality. It means only relative. And on the other hand, Purusha is elevated to the status of an Atman, the all-pervading, eternal Atman of Brahman. In other words, at the ontological level, there is only one reality which is absolutely real. Absolutely real means unchanging, remaining the same in the past, present and future, experience without any change in the waking state, dream state and deep sleep state, which cannot be defined, which is transcendental, which is immanent, which is omnipresent. And that reality is only one. Everything else is real only in the relative sense. The relative reality is called Vyavaharika Satta, means the empirical reality. Vedanta tells you that this world is real, but it is changing. So it is real only you use the word small letter r, not the capital letter R, because only relative. It is not absolutely unreal, so you use the word real in the relative sense. Atman, on the other hand, is absolutely real. That's because it's never born, it's always there. It never dies because it's always there. It never grows and evolves because it's always the same. It is experienced same. And this Atman, the Brahma Satyam, Jagat Mithya. Jagat means, actually Prakriti becomes Jagat in Vedantic terminology. It is Vyavaharika Satta. Vyavaharika means common sense reality, empirical reality. We cannot deny the reality of this table or the chair on which I am sitting, the chairs in front of me, I cannot deny. I cannot deny the reality of things happening around me. I cannot deny the reality of this empirical world of which we are a part. But when I think further, when I become spiritually wiser, I will understand these things are real, but these things undergo changes. So according to Vedanta, even this cosmos, which also undergoes change, maybe it may take several billions of years for the entire cosmos or universe to undergo changes. Still it undergoes change. So an insect or a bacteria that remains for a few seconds or minutes, and the cosmos, the universe, which remains same but only for a few billions of years. And then it undergoes change. They are both relative. Then what is the absolute reality? And that absolute reality is something that we can only experience. And when we meditate, when we live a good life, when we practice certain values, we realize the presence of the divine within us. We can only realize, we can only experience, we cannot explain. That's how yoga meets Vedanta. There's a connecting link. So that's called in yoga and saga springboard to Advaita. That is the definition. That is the view of great thinkers. It's a springboard. You can spring from here, then you reach Vedanta. That's why, all the descriptions of the nature of mind, the nature of mana means Sanskrit mana, and buddhi, intellect, the nature, the way our senses function, the way in which the empirical world functions, all these are fully accepted in Vedanta. But the conclusions are rejected because it begins with dualism, it ends with dualism. Vedanta, on the other hand, tells, well, you can begin with dualism. In the sense, you can go to a temple, there maybe you can go to Hindu temples, you can see all your friends you can see as the deities there. Men and women and animals, all you find. Half animal, half man, all you find. Don't think we consider them as gods. They are only symbols. They are only icons, symbols. You have to draw your mind away from the external world and focus on something transcendental. If anyone tries to meditate, all of a sudden, he'll be meditating on darkness. But for a normal human being, we need a focus point to meditate. For that, these deities, names and forms are formed. But in many of the mantras, many of the sacred word symbols uttered in puja, you can find it begins with dualism. Finally, it sublimates the deity to something impersonal, nameless, formless, all-pervading, non-definable absolute reality. So, but yoga stops with dualism. So that's an important point, remember. So after this, we will take up the last sutra, and then we will conclude Purushartha Shunyanam Gunanam Pradiprasavaha Kaivalyam. So Kaivalya means spiritual liberation. Kevalasya Bhava means identifying one with, also with the one absolute reality. That we will discuss in the next session, then we will conclude. And for the next session, and after this discussion of the last sutra, I will give a short summary of the entire yoga system, and after that we will conclude, and then maybe the following session we will begin with a series of classes on different systems of Indian philosophy. It will be an open session. You are most welcome to ask any question related to Indian philosophy. Remember, when we talk about Indian philosophy, we will also include Buddhism, because Buddhism is considered to be a part of, it's an important part of India's philosophical evolution. So different schools of Buddhism, including the teachings from the Pali canonical literature, Sutta Pitaka, Vinaya Pitaka, Abhidhamma Pitaka also will be included. Along with Hindu philosophy, also we will have a discussion on different aspects of Jaina's philosophy. And okay, no, you are most welcome with interaction. For interaction, thank you, namaskar. Most welcome. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you.
David had his hand up first.
Please, David. Yeah.
David, are you there? Can you? There you are.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
I had a question, Swami.
Yeah.
When we talk about powers,
Yeah.
we're supposed to avoid them in yoga.
Yeah.
However, when one practices yoga meditation, one develops great powers of concentration, and then when one does other worldly duties, one finds that one can concentrate more than the average person, and therefore do worldly duties with much more focused mind. Is that not using yoga powers in the world in a way that one should not?
It is not misusing, because it is a natural, unavoidable consequence of practicing yoga disciplines, that you are able to focus your mind with greater concentration, greater focus. Naturally your work will be more efficient, it will produce better results. You are not misusing actually. It comes to you. See, if you are a very strong person, when you work hard, you can lift a chair more easily than others. You don't deliberately pretend to be a weak person when you are a physically strong person. It becomes easy for you. But you don't demonstrate it and then fight with a neighbor because you are physically strong. You don't do that. So like that, Actually, to be very frank with you, every spiritual practitioner, even those who do not practice yoga, even those who practice prayer, those who practice any other tradition, you find there is a natural increase in the level of efficiency. Work efficiency is natural. That's because when we practice any spiritual discipline, our ability to concentrate our mental powers on one focus point, is in the form of work or whatever it is, without any distraction, without any dissipation, without our concentration flowing out, getting distracted through the 5 channels of senses, that possibility is reduced to the minimum. So naturally the mind is able to focus with greater concentration. That is not a misuse of vibhutis. Remember, actually, in the Yoga Sutra, there is no ban or on using these powers for good purpose. But really, in actual practice, what happens? When you are fully established in yamas and niyamas, your tendency to misuse your powers, that will be practically reduced to the minimum. It will completely disappear. Because you are already established in yamas and niyamas. For example, non-violence. You don't use your powers for doing violence. Let us say asteya and aparigraha. Total freedom from greed or desire for things that belong to others. Such a person will be, and contentment, santosha. You will not misuse your mental, psychological powers for doing harm to others, or you will never misuse it. Why? Because you are fully established in yamas and niyamas. Puranic stories you may have heard, Ravana, all the demons in the Puranas you find. Those fellows, they were not small fries. If you read their life, they went to forests and they meditated for long years. But their purpose was different. And the more they meditated, the greater problem they became to others. They did not get fully established in yamas and niyamas. But then they tried to practice dharana, dhyana and samadhi. They did not get samadhi, obviously, or no dhyana, but dharana they could do. Dharana actually means after pratyahara. Pratyahara actually means, you draw your mind away from distracting objects outside, and the mind is turned inward. That mind becomes a sharp weapon. With that mind, if an evil man can do terrible evil things, really speaking. That's what these demons do in Hindu Puranic literature. Hindu Puranic literature are full of such figures. And then Vishnu had to take incarnation to neutralize them. God has to come down as incarnation. This is the whole joke. So you can find these stories. Actually, many of them were up to no goods. But they did practice a lot of asanas and dharana they did. And what was the result? They brought destruction to themselves. So this is an important point to remember. But a real spiritual person who has practiced yamas and niyamas will never misuse his powers and will never become a problem to others. On the other hand, if a person, without going through these disciplines of yamas and niyamas, if he practices some kind of a concentration, you effort to focus the mind on a single point, that person may also get delusions and hallucinations. But it's an important point to remember. People who practice dharana, they call themselves meditating. The English term is meditation, but dhyana. But actually it's only concentration. Roughly it is dharana. That kind of dharana, because your mind is drawn away from external objects through pratyahara. And then mind is turned inward. So dharana. But at the same time, your mind is full of violent tendencies because your mind is not fully established in ahimsa. And you are very greedy. No asteya, no aparigraha. And you are very sensual because no brahmacharya and no purity. Such a person practices terrible concentration. What happens, Two things happen. There are two possibilities. One, the person will have hallucinations. Both visual hallucinations and also auditory hallucinations. Suddenly you hear somebody came and appeared, gave you some instruction. You have to do the terrible thing, you have to do wonderful things for the existence of the world. Well, if somebody tells you, Vivekananda refers to that. If somebody tells you, I'm inspired, I have a vision of something, and I want to crush this world, I want to do some terrible thing. That's a kind of delusion or hallucination. So audio hallucination and delusion go together. False thoughts are delusions. Here you imagine that you heard something is audio hallucination. Visual hallucination sometimes. Well, if this man becomes like a Buddha, calm and quiet, serene, peaceful, if such a person becomes a blessing to others, in that person's blessing, presence, you feel a lot of peace of mind. And he also, by his words and actions, give peace of mind to others. That means that person has practiced yamas and niyamas, ahimsa, satya, steya, brahmacharya, parigrah, non-violence, etc. Then that experience is genuine. On the other hand, if a person has not practiced yamas and niyamas, then the person claims, well, I had a very terrible vision, I want to do all this in it. Well, you ask him, you listen to him, is he serene, peaceful? Is he a good human being, non-violent? Because Patanjali has given this list 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You cannot escape Patanjali. Patanjali has presented for you just 5 disciplines. Because Sarvapriyananda Mahavartaha means here it is universal. No spirituality without non-violence. No spirituality without freedom from greed. No spirituality without freedom from impurity. No spirituality without contentment, santosha.
So what about
when
Swami Vivekananda developed some powers, and he was practicing yama and niyama, but Ramakrishna told him, stop meditating because he could see things at a distance. He said, oh, you should not have touched Kali Maharaj. So even though he was practicing yama and niyama, even though he did that, Sri Ramakrishna said, no, don't use powers. And how is that different from the worldly person then?
Yeah, actually Swami Vivekananda, they were still growing, The very fact that Swamiji himself narrated that incident, an incident that Sri Ramakrishna corrected him. Sometimes even as a result of your spiritual practice, you happen to become a divine instrument in the hands of God. That is not misuse of powers. You, because of your own spiritual advancement, happen to become a blessing to the rest of the world. You become an effective tool in the hands of God, and you become a blessing to others. That's not misusing powers. But in this case, actually, they were very young at that time. They were still growing. Sri Ramakrishna, like a headmaster, were training them. In fact, that whole period is so charming, so instructive, so inspiring. These two they were youngsters, less than 20 years. They were practicing meditation. And it's actually, when you read those stories, you understand how important it is for one to get established yama-niyamas. And remember, wherever Vivekananda went, he became a blessing to others. Wherever Swami Abhedanandaji went, he became a blessing to others. We are discussing this spiritual tradition because one Vivekananda came to America and he spent less than 5 years in this country, and 2 visits. Just 5 years, remember. And that too, it's a brainstorming 4 or 5 years. And because of that, see the impact. That means Swami Vivekananda became a great blessing to others. So he became he became a tool in the hands of Almighty God. And he became a blessing to others. And that happens to every great spiritual person who is established in yamas and niyamas. Irrespective of whether you want to or not, you turn out to be an instrument in the hands of a higher power. That's true of these great spiritual personalities, like Vivekananda. So that's an important thing. Thank you for the question. Yeah.
Thank you. Yogi, you are welcome.
Yogi, most welcome, Yogi. Please. Yogi,
Namaskar.
Namaskar.
I have 2 questions somewhat related. First one is about the Prakriti. The purpose of Prakriti is said to be bhoga and apavarga. It's experience and liberation for the Purusha. And to give this experience, and it's very simple thing in my opinion to make somebody miserable. For that purpose, why does nature create this planet, this solar system, and there are 100 billion stars in this galaxy and 200 billion galaxies in the universe? All this seems very unnecessary to.
You are right. You are absolutely. I fully accept that view. First of all, we should remember there are two methods in analyzing life and existence. One, you can very easily say one day God just created this world, 1, 2, 3, 4, like that, in an order. It's simple, but from cause to effect. But yoga is a different approach. A yoga practitioner, a yoga scientist, so to speak, looks around and he looks at himself, his mind and his thoughts and his intellect, his emotions and feelings. Then he thinks, well, what's the purpose of my life? Why do I think the way I'm thinking? What's the mystery of my mind? What about what's the nature of my emotions and feelings and thoughts? As a result of this, a yoga student is analyzing. And slowly he analyzes. And then he comes to the conclusion, well, my true nature is one Purusha, self-effulgent reality. But I can get back to my true identity only if I become a good human being. A good human being. What's the meaning of becoming a good human being? Practicing yamas and niyamas, non-violence, freedom from greed, and so on. When you do this, then you don't have to practice after yamas and then niyamas, then asana, pranayama, etc. Actually, in real yoga practice, if you get established in ahimsa, you automatically get established in other related things. Actually, it's just like getting you get a bus that is moving, you get into the bus, it goes there. You don't have to jump and run sitting in a bus. The bus is moving already. So once you get established in the first of the yamas, ahimsa, a person who is fully established in non-violence, he will have no greed because he won't have any, his mind automatically undergoes a vast transformation. So we cannot really explain this without actually practicing complete non-violence. You can easily imagine. Think of any human being who was fully established in non-violence and who was not a yogi. Christ, Buddha, Shankaracharya, Sriramukrishna, Vivekananda, or even take any matter. They were all established in non-violence. And they were all yogis. So remember, you are just taking a ticket and boarding the bus. Then you reach there. Now, actually, the whole analysis of Prakriti and evolution actually is only a kind of analysis of the details of our own mind, our own feelings and our own emotions. If you ask the question, why should one day God create this Prakriti and then all these things? Actually, it is only a metaphor. No, I tell you, nobody takes seriously this Prakriti dancing and Prakriti. It is only a description using an analogy, a metaphor. It's very symbolic actually. Yoga is actually very simple. Very, very simple. You can sit there right now, and if you're just practicing good thoughts, good feelings, mentally, sincerely, with all intensity, that moment you are boarding the bus. You got into the compartment. Train is moving. You don't have to believe in anything, really speaking. And once you start practicing, you see the first sutra of Sadhanapada, that is actually the kindergarten of yoga. That is Kriya Yoga. tapaswadhyaya ishara pranidhananani kriya yoga. What does it mean? Kriya Yoga, according to Vajaspati and Vijnana Bhikshu, Kriya Yoga includes all the three yogas, Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga. So actually the Vijnana Bhikshu, many commentators say, if you just actually start practicing, I will only have good thoughts, I will do something good for others, you are already boarding the bus. The whole analysis of two ontological realities, Purusha, self-effulgent, Prakriti, non-effulgent, it is only a description using a metaphor. Actually, in my opinion, a person who reads, a person who practices this Karma Yoga, which is a part of Kriya Yoga, one, and Ahimsa, which is the first step, mean Ahimsa, Satya, Asteya, Brahmacharya, Aparigraha. There's 5 elements of the Yama, which is the first, is a kindergarten again. If a person really practices Karma Yoga and Ahimsa, nothing more is required. And then if you start, once you get established in this, read Patanjali Yoga Sutras, you will understand, it's only a metaphor. It's only used in symbolic language. Remember, yoga, Hindu religious text do not ask you to take every word as the ultimate wisdom of God. Remember this very, very well. Hindu philosophy tells you, you read this book, close the book, sit there, try to become a good human being, you can reach your goal. Remember, you should become a good human being. Good not only to those who belong to your tradition, good, but you should be a good human being to everyone, every creature, both human and non-human creatures. So that's the meaning of becoming a true, good human being. And remember this very well. Every word of any of this book is not expected to be taken as the ultimate pramana. It is only a direction, it is only a guidance. As much as you possible, you take. This is an important point to remember. Okay, thank you, Yogi. Your very important question. Now we'll come to another question. Thank you, Yogi.
Second question is...
Yeah, excuse me, Yogi. Would you mind if I give a chance to some other student?
Sure.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a ironic question on the YouTube.
Yeah.
From a student with a very reasonable question, and
Yeah.
that is asking for suggestions from the books,
Yeah.
some additional reading
Yeah.
about Patanjali Yoga Sutras, Vyasa, etc.
Patanjali Yoga Sutras, Vyasas,
Yes,
commentary.
he's looking for additional readings. What books or authors would you suggest?
Okay, I shall give you a list of books. Certainly, I shall give you. Just a minute. Remember.
You had mentioned Vijnana Bhikshu and Vajaspati, etc.
I can give you a list of books that are normally taught to serious students in the traditional schools of yoga, yoga curriculums. But after giving the list, then I shall say a few things about how to approach this. First, Tattva Vaisharati, Vajaspati Misra. Bhoja Raja, he was a king, Raja Martanda. Then Vijnana Bhikshu Yoga Bhashya Vartikam. Yoga Mani Prabha is by Ramananda Saraswati. Yoga Sudhagaram is Sadasivendra Saraswati, who is actually lived in 18th century. Yoga Mani Prabha is Bhava Ganesha Dikshita. And then Yoga Sutra Vritti is Nagoji Bhatta. Yoga Siddhanta Chandrika is Narayana Tirtha. Now remember, this is of course Sutras of Patanjali, Bhashya by Vyasa, and Bhashya Vivarana by Shankara, Sri Shankaracharya. These are some of the books, almost 11 books, including Yoga Sutras. Now coming to a list of books available in English, I would suggest that you first try to read Swami Vivekananda's translation and interpretation. There are many reasons why I prefer to recommend this book for any beginner, any serious student of yoga. The reason is, it's obvious from his interpretation that Swamiji had a first-hand experience of what he's actually talking about. Because Swamiji gives some suggestions and recommendations which can come only from a person who has actually experienced what yoga actually teaches. That's one thing. Secondly, it is very readable. And then Swamiji also fills some gaps. If you read any translation of, let us say, this Vyasa Bhashya by Swami Hariharananda Aranya, English translation is very good. But remember, unless you learn the book from a teacher, this translation may not be of much real help to you. If you already know Sanskrit, if you can read the Bhashya, then the translation can be additional help. But it won't be an introduction to yoga like Swami Vivekananda's introduction. Of course, there are other books which are more of an academic nature. S.N. Dasgupta, Surendranath Dasgupta has written books, and Mr. Dukmini and Artreya, there are a few other writers, but I would always recommend a serious student. I would recommend Swami Vivekananda's exposition, because there are many areas where Swamiji gives clear warning where the aspirant has to be very, very careful. That sort of guidance you won't get from other teachers. That's an important thing. Swamiji's exposition can actually be considered to be a commentary in English, as authentic as Vyasa's commentary itself. Yeah.
Thank you, Maharaj. I know that you have mentioned this matter before, but it was very good to hear it recapped at this point.
Yeah.
Vinyesh, you have a hand up next.
Yeah.
Hariom, Maharaj.
Yeah.
Maharaj, I had a question when you were mentioning temple deities as being forms or symbols, right?
Yeah.
So when you were saying that, one thing I thought was people who are into temple worship or deity worship, the moment they would start seeing deities as forms or symbols as opposed to the idea of God itself, wouldn't that put a spanner in the works for their actual spiritual progress, because they would no longer be able to do deity worship the way they were into it? Isn't there a sort of contradiction in the real understanding of temple deities versus worship of temple deities?
I would not have put things in the same language if I were addressing an audience in a temple, really speaking, because there is a format that you have to follow according to the audience. It's a modern audience, and many of them belonging to different traditions, so you need a more universal, rational approach. Now, coming back to temple, see, for example, when you go to any Hindu deity, Hindu temple, you find, and then you read some Purana, some mythological books narrating the teachings of the life of those deities, so you find there is so much of yamas and niyamas in their teachings. Think of any deity. Actually, sanctity, sacredness, wisdom, universality, compassion, and universal acceptance of higher principles. These teachings actually are symbolic of many of all these deities. You cannot find a single one. Even the picture of Divine Mother, their protection, guidance, shelter for the virtuous from all, let us say, imaginary problems and evils. So you can find Abhaya Mudra is there, protection. So you find in all these, I think this concept of deities, essentially it is an expansion of Shankaracharya's Panchayatana Puja and Shanmata Sthavana. So there were innumerable deities in Vedic literature: Indra, Mitra, Varuna, Agni, Deva, Prithvi, Surya, and so on. Soma, and so on. Of that, Shankaracharya organized the entire Vedic pantheon under 5 heads. I mean, the Shanmata Sthavana. Surya, Devi, Shiva, Vishnu, Kumara, Ganapati, and so on. Now, each of these, take any of these deities. There is compassion, wisdom, universality, universal compassion, and any person who meditates on any of the deities, you have seen, perhaps you have seen in your own home, in your own neighborhood, old people who get up in the morning 3:30, taking bath and then chanting something, doing this puja. Can they ever imagine doing anything violent? No. Ahimsa is there. And then they won't care for anything. They won't take care for taking things from others. Asteya is there. Aparigraha is there. And they are so contented. I've seen many of these Orthodox people who worship Ganapati, Subramanya, Uri, all that. That contentment, that non-violence, compassion, universal approach. These are essential characteristics of the typical Hindu householder who does worship any of these deities. So whom are they meditating? Whom are they worshipping? They are worshipping a symbol that reminds them of these great qualities and characteristics. And that, what does it mean? So they all point out to one impersonal transcendental reality, a nameless, formless, in the sense beyond form, beyond name, not without form, without name. Means transcending names and forms, one impersonal supreme reality. That's why in many of the mantras, the deities are addressed to be impersonal, transcendental. How can a deity with name and form be universal, be omnipresent? Vishnu, Vyapnodi, the Vishnu. That's the meaning of it. Vishnu, it's a meaning. And all the mantras of Vishnu, you are the all-pervading Supreme Spirit. But if you go to temple, it is that deity is established in a small, tiny room. How can the deity be all-pervading? So that form is only a symbol of something that is transcendental, something universal, something all-pervading. So that is there's a link between the universal and the deity with name and form, whom you worship in your worship room in your home. There's a connection between the all-pervading transcendental and the deity in your shrine room. Okay, it's clear? Yeah.
Swamiji, if there's time, Saugata may have the last question.
Most welcome, Saugata. Yes, there is time. One question.
Maharaj, can you explain a little bit about this Ghata Pratiyogita?
Oh, yeah. Okay, now, Pratiyogi. Pratiyogi actually means the counterpart. Ghata Pratiyogi means Ghada itself, actually a pot indicates, a pot is actually a negation of the absence of a pot. A pot is a negation of the absence of a pot.
That means the pot is present.
Yeah. Because that is called, so Pratiyogi is a counterpoint. So
Pratiyogi means competition, right?
Yeah. Actually, that's why that is the competition. The ordinary language, Pratiyogi is a particular technical term in Nyaya. So Ghata Pratiyogi, Ghata Pratiyogi, Parinama, Avaranda, Nigrahya, Kramaha. So a pot is, or a pot indicates, it indicates the absence of a pot. Yeah, that means pot is present. Now,
Yes.
you may ask, this is not used in literature, but in the technical language of Nyaya, these expressions are very, very important, they are very essential, because in a single verbal formation, you can put a lot of ideas in the Nyaya system. The language, the Navya in modern Indian logic the language itself is a special category. Every book you have to learn from a teacher who has learned from his teacher. It's almost like more like learning surgery. You can't do through correspondence.
Yeah.
Impossible. So that's it. So Ghata Pradyogi means it indicates a pot indicates the absence of a pot, or Ghata negates the absence of a Ghata. Ghata means pot. It negates the absence of a pot. You may ask this, why it is important here? Actually, this is the only sutra in which Patanjali has used a technical term exclusively belonging to Nyaya tradition. He is very simple, otherwise words are very simple. That's why it's okay. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.